Welcome to Good Tech. I'm Elizabeth Perry with White Bull. First of all, I hope you've all stayed well and are okay with as we slide into this new normal, as we're calling it. As a reminder, this show is recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel and on ubngo.com/goodtech and on iTunes or any podcast platform you choose. For those of you watching live today, if you have any questions for myself or today's guest, which I'm sure you will, simply dial the number on your screen and we'll do our best to get you in on the conversation. Today, we're going to tackle a problem that most of you know well. It's legacy login with usernames and passwords. Some call it password hell. Forgotten, stolen, too weak, too short, too many complicated requirements. In fact, the username and password method for login security was invented in 1961 at MIT, and the tech industry has been looking for something better ever since. Why am I putting that Dilbert comic strip up there? Because these were produced in the 90s. So we've been trying to tackle this problem for a long time. So why is it that this method is still widely used? And despite it being unsecure, the number one threat behind data breaches and identity theft, data breaches will cost trillions of dollars this year, according to experts and to companies worldwide. What are the alternatives that we should know about? What should we be looking for? How to simplify, secure, and save money. Here to help us tackle those questions and more is someone whose work centers around that mission to simplify and secure our digital life and to save costs in the process. Please welcome expert on passwordless authentication, coming to us from California. It's the CEO of TraitWare, Heath Spencer.
Hello, Elizabeth, and thanks for having me today. Great to be here.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. This is something that, everybody has a username and password. And it's just so frustrating. And you say go passwordless, and you're in the graphic that we're going to put up right now. What's wrong with legacy login? This is probably a big question, but what is wrong with it?
Well, there's a lot wrong with legacy login, and as you mentioned, was created decades ago and really was never intended to do what we use it for, and what most applications and enterprises use it for today is in simple terms, it's the gated access to any service, right? Whether that's a personal account or a subscription-based service. The easiest way to think about it is it's the front door lock that lets you in to a digital environment, right? With the expanse of everything we do today and so much of it being online, we've had to expand our use of that legacy technology tremendously. And when you couple what you do for work with your personal life, you end up with an enormous amount of different usernames, different passwords. And our frustration is centered around the idea that we just can't be that creative to have hundreds of these to remember. And then that creates risks and vulnerabilities because we typically land in a scenario where we use a similar passphrase or a similar self-created algorithm to make a password. And that leads to the ease of replication. If one of those is captured in a data breach, and actually just this month with everything, well, not this month, but in May, 8.8 billion sets of records were stolen during this pandemic, which means that some of your passwords were captured. and will be reused across different things, because if we're honest with ourselves, we likely have used the same password across more than one environment, and or at least a small variation of that password, which the computers today can create different variations very easily. And you can go Google how easy it is to generate even up to a 12 character password. And IBM's got machines now that can do amazing things, and which means that bad people also have that access. So that's the problem with legacy login today. And at simple terms, there's the front door of your house, and there's the back door, and then there's the windows, and there's basically different ways to enter a structure, right? Well, there's different ways to enter digital environments as well. The easiest and path of least resistance for a bad actor as well as a upstanding citizen is the front door, right? So our access through that front door is still the number one cause of data breach,
Mm-hmm.
and why we need to address at least looking at how we modernize the front door lock.
Yeah. So it's security. It's the cost of a data breach costing us a gazillion dollars. People don't realize that. They're very expensive, data breaches,
Well,
and
data
the waste
breaches
of
are
time as
expensive,
well.
and people assume that, well, I don't have any, I'm a small business or a mid-tier business, I don't have any data that they want to steal. Most likely you're going to get caught in a data breach because the cyber criminals, bad actors are just running these tools that hit everything, and you get caught up in the mix of that. But beyond that, passwords themselves have a cost. Managing them, provisioning them, deprovisioning them, training around them, creating policy around them. They are expensive to use in the business world. They're expensive to use, and even managing if you have a service that's providing a web gateway to your customers, you've likely had to create some way to reset passwords that's reduced friction for the users, all of those things. There's a cost to just the password, not even the big picture of the soft cost of the data breach, which is
Mm-hmm.
can ruin your brand, but there is a cost to just passwords themselves.
Yeah, I mean, especially nowadays, that's something we have to really pay attention to. So then why are we still using this method? Are big corporations sort of out to, keep us on legacy login? You know,
I don't think it's anyone's intent to keep us stuck on legacy login. The biggest reason that we're using legacy login still today in most scenarios, especially from a consumer side, is that when most applications or services were created, even though the username and password field box as the front door lock were common, they were typically encoded or created in that environment in a custom way, which means they communicate with that service in a unique way, which they thought was how they created security in that time when those things were created. To move beyond that, service providers need to look to modern authentication standards like SAML or OpenID Connect, and allow for those types of integrations to be available. And you're seeing this change currently already in the internal space. If you're an employee at a major corporation, you're likely using some sort of single sign-on or and added multi-factor authentication, which we'll discuss more in detail as we go on. But they've started to roll out modern integrations from the inside to increase security, reduce cost, mainly reduce friction for the employee, and help them adhere to password policies, where if you've got to change a password every 6 weeks, let's try to make it you only got to change one password, not 100 passwords at your job. And even at your job, they haven't been able to do, because of regulation, single sign-on for all of the environments, because they have to then decide the value of the data behind each gateway and whether or not they're allowed to have certain data information behind a single point of entry via an SSO portal or not. And so there are situations where you still have to maintain separate silos of information or resources, which still creates multiple logins for the users at that job. So we are seeing a move beyond, or at least an attempt to move beyond the legacy login in the enterprise world from the inside out. And we're hopeful, and even the bigs, Apple, Microsoft, Google, they're all pushing to go passwordless for the consumer side and drive adoption of these authentication standards, which will allow people to choose their identity provider. It's just this shift, the perception that the corporation has that trying to train the user how to do a different method, and they think it's expensive to make this switch. But you're already seeing at certain levels the choices, like if you go to create a new account, you may get presented with create a username and password or use your Facebook or Google identity to log in. So that would be an example of choosing your identity provider, and then whether or not you trust that identity provider to keep it safe. Those situations, again, are just typically leveraging an existing set of username and passwords. So if you choose Google, it's just using the credentials that you have at Google so that you don't have to make a new one, versus moving to modern authentication that will move to a token-based login versus a credential-based login.
So, let's talk about why this is so relevant today. I mean, we're all working from home and it's remote work, and people also don't realize the risks involved with working remotely. Why is it so important now to start thinking about alternative methods?
Well, for working remotely, your corporate job needs to think about how you're authenticating now outside of the corporate veil, right? So when you left the office, when you were at the office and your desktop at the office was inside of the firewall at the office, and the computer itself has policies on what types of websites you're allowed to visit or what type of files you may or may not be allowed to open. The moment that you left the office and went to work from home, or really today, the standard needs to be work from anywhere that has connectivity, you're now no longer behind or under the umbrella of that corporate firewall, and most likely don't have those policies being enforced because you're outside of that umbrella or out from underneath that umbrella. The bad actors know, the cyber criminals know this. They also know that there's a lot of information hungry people out there, and they will use this to strategically fish for your credentials while you're distracted by the pandemic, the other events going on. They will try to use major organizations, whether it's the World Health Organization, the CDC, and send fake emails to get you to access something in an effort to capture. Most of those fake emails are intended to capture your login so that then they can elevate their access to different things within that. So you need to be cautious on the types of websites you're accessing. Your company needs to decide if they're allowing you to work from a personal computer, or if they've provided you a work computer that is still managed but is going through a VPN or something through that to get there. But the biggest thing is you now need to be really conscious about, do I click a link or not? My recommendation to you is, if you get something that's asking for a login, you never click a link to go to a login portal. You go to your designated URL for your company or your bank account or your whatever tool you're going to visit, your QuickBooks Online for your home thing. Do not click a link to get to that portal. You either have it saved as a bookmark, right, in your web browser, or you visit it directly. And then that way you can always check that it's the HTTPS website that has the correct address and is secure. So just as learning a human behavior, don't enter a set of credentials that you click a link to get to.
That's good advice. And I know a lot of people that, I mean, just it happens all the time.
It does.
It
It
happens all
does.
the time.
And that's a reason that we need to move beyond legacy login, right? Especially during this time of remote work, because it's just become easier to make look, we all make mistakes. It will happen. You will, I will click a bad link, right? Human error is going to be in the way. But if I can eliminate having to enter something in a field box or whatever that, or that accidentally downloads malware that's using a keystroke logger trying to capture my credentials somewhere else, if I've eliminated those credentials, it becomes much more difficult for me to make a mistake that becomes costly. We're going to make a mistake, but can we avoid that, or can we reduce the exposure of cost to that mistake?
So let's talk about some of the alternatives that are out there for, instead of a username and password, and how are they more secure, more cost saving, and simple?
Yeah. So again, there's two sides of this. There's the consumer facing side that we all have to use personal use items, whether it's going to our personal bank account or not. Then there's the enterprise tools that we use at our jobs. On the consumer side, we have a couple choices. One is we pay for our own password vault, right? Which has been a stepping stone of, okay, how do we help the user manage these hundreds or multiple hundreds of passwords and maybe create stronger passwords? So tools like Dashlane or 1Password or LastPass were created to help the user store those in essence, a vault, right? You're going to lock these passwords up in a digital vault, and then that digital vault is going to release those when prompted and autofill them. And that allows you to create a longer, more secure password because you don't actually have to type it in and you're not saving it in your web browser, which is really a no-no. Do not save passwords in your web browser. But if you are using a tool like Dashlane or 1Password, and I'll be honest, I use one of those tools for personal use right now because we have not, as a company, gotten there to be able to eliminate the consumer side of going passwordless yet. But that's one example. But I want people to understand those tools, all they're doing is stuffing your credential or autofilling your credentials for you, which is the same thing that the bad actors are doing. So when that credential gets stolen in one of these data breaches, it can be replayed, as we earlier discussed, in that way. Another new method that is growing in popularity for service providers because they think it's reducing friction for the user is a methodology called Magic Link, where when you register for an account, they're going to leverage your email provider to tie your device via your email account to that service and allowing you just to use that to create a token on your device, whether it's your mobile device or your PC, laptop, etc., to log in via that. So basically when you register, it's going to send you a link in your email. You click the link, it then places a certificate on your device. And then that certificate is what allows you to authenticate to that service in the future without having to create a password. This relies heavily on your email never being taken over, right? And I have someone who works in security at a modern company that is growing rapidly, and they're using Magic Link because their stance is that Google and Microsoft are going to be much more, and they are much better suited to protect against the account takeover of your email account than they would be of protecting the password you created for their service. And there's some validity to that. And there is a way that that works, but it's still relying heavily on your credentials to your email account and not getting something taken over in your email account. So that's kind of two ways that the consumer facing tools are using. And there is some overlap to that in the enterprise world. A lot of the enterprise world is using password vaults because they need to. And then in the enterprise world, they're adding layers of either a single sign-on with a password vault, or they're adding layers of a single sign-on with added security of multi-factor authentication to strengthen the security around the legacy login, which basically, because they didn't know how to move away from legacy login, they were working on adding layers of security, what I call band-aids, to a broken leg. You're trying to put a band-aid on a broken system, not, it's a gaping wound that needs to be sutured, not put a band-aid on it.
Right. And then, so you mentioned MFA, and just for the newbies out there, maybe let's talk about multi-factor authentication and single sign-on, because that's what we're getting to TraitWare and what TraitWare does.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what you're going to see at most of your jobs these days, is some measure of multi-factor authentication. In a simple terms, multi-factor authentication is just requiring on more than one factor to identify you are who you say you are when you go to access something. So the definition of multi-factor authentication, or you'll hear it termed originally as 2FA or two-factor authentication, or in some cases two-step verification, is relying on something that you know. So that's one factor. So a password is something you know. The next factor could be something you have. So a secure token. Some of you will have worked in jobs where you've used an RSA key, which was one of the original two-factor or multi-factor ways of accessing something. Is you had this RSA key that generated a 13-digit one-time passcode that you had to enter as a second step to identify another factor of who you are. Now, modern technology of that type of situation, there's a company called YubiKey, and Microsoft's partnered with them to try to go passwordless using a separate token that generates a certificate from that token. The thing with YubiKey is, and they even advertise this, most people I know that are using YubiKey, they buy one for each machine or each device that they have, and they leave it in there. So to me, it's no longer multi-factor if you're constantly leaving it in the USB port and never removing it, because if someone gets your password and the certificate's plugged in, they're in. So that's a couple examples. Then you're starting to see phone-based authenticators like Google Authenticator, Authy, Duo, where you go to log into something and it sends you a one-time passcode. So again, it's generating a 6-digit or 13-digit code that you've got to enter in that came from a text message or came via an app on your phone. Still requires the user to use. So to have more than one factor, it's still your legacy login plus an extra code. Some of the modern ones now are allowing you just to tap a yes, it's me, or a no, it's not me in an app. So there's an accept decline tap function, which TraitWare actually uses for certain circumstances where we can't go true passwordless yet, but we have the stepping stone. You can use at least multi-factor authentication by using your phone as something you have, right? You possess your phone, you put an app on it, and it becomes the separate token for something that you have, similar to the RSA key or the YubiKey. So it's something you are, something you know, something you have is the definition of multi-factor authentication. Then single sign-on is, or SSO. So single sign-on is the lengthy version of SSO, was created again to allow the user to only have to create a single set of credentials to access multiple services. So at your job, you likely have an SSO portal that allows you to access your email, all of the other tools that you use, whether it's an HR tool like Zendesk or a CRM tool like HubSpot or Salesforce, or any of the, whatever department you're in, you've got a list of tools that you use to do your job. It could be a spreadsheet tool, it could be whatever. They're putting all of those tools behind a single pane of glass or a single front door lock. And then so that once you sign in once, you can access all of those tools. So that's kind of the high level view of single sign-on and multi-factor. And at most jobs, you're likely seeing a MFA enhanced access through single sign-on. So you've got a single sign-on portal, but you're using multi-factor authentication to access that single sign-on portal.
Well, let's jump right into, while we're on this, because this is what TraitWare does, and I want to just jump right into how TraitWare handles the problem.
Yeah. So what TraitWare did is, we looked at how do we leverage modern technology to reduce the friction for the user and increase the security for the business. And over 90% of us today, and this is not my stats, this is Verizon, Forrester, all the major research companies can back these stats up, but over 90% of us are using a smart mobile device today that has a biometric enabled function on it, whether that's you're using a modern iOS device with Face ID, or even just a more recent one with fingerprint reader, or on an Android device, they have their own versions of face or fingerprint reader. TraitWare can leverage those biometric features of your mobile device. And as we just discussed, the mobile device is something you possess. Now, what's unique about TraitWare and what we have our first couple patents issued on is how we register your mobile device as a secure token. And we generate, the way that you interact with your mobile device is different than the way I interact with my mobile device, or my spouse interacts with her mobile device, or even if I had a twin, we would interact with our mobile devices differently. How you use your device is so unique, and the mathematical representation that we can generate from that interaction with it separates you to greater than 1 in 300 billion. So now you have a very unique token that, again, Verizon, Forrester, these studies show that we don't on a typical day leave it more than 3 feet away from us at any given point during the day, because we're addicted to it, and it's just a necessity of life facilitation today. We carry this device wherever we go. Mm-hmm. So how do we use that to create a digital identity that allows me to access other resources in a simple method? So once we've created this unique secure token, we can then leverage for the something that you are, the biometric features that are native to the device. And what's great about this is we're able to do that in a way, especially on an iOS device, that never puts your personal identity or personal information at risk, especially related to your biometric identity. When you register your face on a iOS device or on an Android device, or you register your fingerprint, similar to the mathematical representation that we create to tokenize your mobile device, that's really just a mathematical equation or mathematical template of your biometric. It's not actually a picture of your face or a picture of your fingerprint that, if for some reason it was taken, could be reused in a malicious way. Apple creates this mathematical representation of your biometric in a secure enclave on the device with an algorithm that they don't even know. They'll never see it. We'll never see it. It never leaves the mobile device. And yet we can leverage that access to allow for something you are, coupled with the something you have, this now 1 in 300 billion token that we've created, to then log in or access applications that you want to via a single sign-on portal, or through TraitWare, you can have a single pane of glass in your app to multiple accounts. So I can have a single access point to different siloed resources from a single pane of glass in my mobile device. I can access those tools on my mobile device or on my laptop, a desktop, a TV screen, anything, any other screen that has web access. I can use my mobile device to log into those other tools. And we accomplish this piggybacking on the authentication standards that single sign-on has grown in adoption through SAML 2.0 or OpenID Connect, which is why we are very simply plug and play for most enterprise applications today. We can be deployed in 20 minutes because we're leveraging existing authentication standards. Now, the advantage is that when you deploy TraitWare, we're not storing passwords, we're not stuffing them. We are moving you to a modern biometrically enabled multi-factor authentication login where all of that technology is inherent in the solution, and the user can log in and literally in some instances in 2 touches, no typing, and never have to remember or create a password ever again.
Yeah, I mean, and so we were talking about this offline, and you know, people are afraid to change. People are afraid to do something different. And how can we address that fear and sort of say to people, look, this is actually safer, it's actually simpler, it's not, it's cost effective, how can we assuage those fears?
Well, it's an education process, but people are becoming more and more comfortable, right? And as a small startup, we don't have the resources to do the global education that's really needed right now, but we can piggyback on the education that Apple's done, that Google's done. And, as I said earlier, 80 to 90% of us are carrying around a mobile device that leverages biometrics. The vast majority have become comfortable using that biometric to unlock their phone. Now it's just a stepping stone of, okay, if you're comfortable using that biometric unlocking your phone, why would you not trust it to unlock other applications? Mm-hmm. And so it's just a simple stepping stone of, and you're already seeing this, there are some banking apps out there and some other apps that are using biometrics to open their mobile app. So Wells Fargo, Chase, PayPal, if you install their mobile app, you can, for convenience sake, and I'll explain the word convenience sake in just a moment, use a biometric to unlock their mobile app and not have to use a credential. So they're already doing the education around this. The stepping stone that those apps, the mobile apps, haven't bridged, and where TraitWare has bridged the gap, and the reason I said for convenience is, for some reason, even those bigger companies, Wells Fargo, PayPal, Chase, haven't trusted or haven't been willing to take the step to truly lock it to that biometric. Mm-hmm. So, and I think a lot of this arises out of when biometrics first came out, especially the fingerprint readers came out, they weren't as reliable as they are today. They're improving with every release of every software update and every new phone that comes out. And when they first came out, if your fingerprint was sweaty or wet from washing dishes or you'd been swimming for an hour, it may not work, right? So they didn't want to lock something down to that to prohibit you from accessing your stuff. Now with Face ID, those kinds of things, it works tremendously better. Is there some adjustment now with COVID-19 and wearing face masks, and Apple's already addressing this and rewriting the algorithms to do it? So that technology is becoming more reliable and more trusted every day. But in those banking apps that I just mentioned, if it fails, you can still go back and use your legacy login to log in on your mobile device. And the biggest thing is they haven't bridged the gap from using that biometric authentication on your mobile device to log in on a separate screen, i.e. your desktop, your laptop, a TV, anything. So when you go to that other screen, you're still required to use your legacy login that's there, which means that your credentials are sitting somewhere in a database that could be breached someday if they had a breach. And then you risk account takeover, which, if it's your banking app, they're going to have to take ownership of it. It's like getting your credit card stolen. They take ownership of it. You get it fixed. And the consumer, because of that mentality, really feels like, well, I'm helpless anyway. What's the point? Other than we're all sick and tired and frustrated of username and passwords and having to enter them, recreate them, or especially for those services that you don't log into all the time, like it's like once every 3 months, you're literally most of the time going to hit forgot password and just start over, which is
Right.
costing you time and money. If you're an employee at a company, it's costing the
Right.
company.
And speaking of companies, so TraitWare is an enterprise app play,
Yep.
and we talked about zero trust recently, and that's become sort of a buzz uh, phrase. Let's talk about that a little bit, because because the people that are leading companies out there need to know about zero trust and why it's important, and why Traitware has that zero trust architecture. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So zero trust kind of originated as a thought piece, and the concept of how do we trust but verify a person is who they say they are when they're trying to access certain information. Now, again, whoever's deciding how valuable that information or that resource is, or that application or service that you're trying to access is, determines how often you need to re-authenticate. So this could go anywhere from, let's say your administrator allows you to have a session token that's valid for 30 days to access your G Suite account. They're trusting that when you authenticated via your laptop and they place a certificate on that laptop, they're trusting that for that period of time. Zero trust takes that a step beyond, where instead of just trusting it, they want to verify that it is a known trusted device each time you access that account. And so where Traitware comes in is that the architecture of Traitware provisions zero trust in the way that we're requiring you to authenticate to the application via your biometric. So it's transparent to the user. You don't have to type anything, you don't have to enter a password. There's no extra steps for the user, but in the architecture of the solution, we are verifying your secure token. So that mathematical representation that we create actually lives on your token and on an authentication server, and it looks at itself every time I use the app. And to even enter the app, I have to use a biometric to access it. It's frictionless for me as a user, but the solution is inherently verifying that it is the secure token, that it is me accessing it, which then provides this trust of access with verification of the process each time. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really the foundation of zero trust, is how do we verify each time someone accesses a solution or application or service provider. The problem with zero trust using legacy login is there isn't a simple way to do that that doesn't cause the user friction, which then typically causes downtime. So they're trying to do it solely from the back end. So
Mm-hmm.
we're currently working on providing Citrix some information on how we do zero trust at the authentication level, where they deploy zero trust at the machine level or at the application level, where they're like, most Citrix deployments are leveraging legacy login, but they're doing a lot of behind the scenes verification, whether it's through certificate pinning or other types of methodologies or solutions to provide this zero trust verification of your laptop, of your mobile device, of the virtual machine that you're accessing, etc. So we're enhancing what Citrix is doing by providing zero trust at the edge of the network, where you authenticate to the environment. So it doubles up on that zero trust environment in a
Mm-hmm.
way that reduces friction for the user.
Yeah.
They're trying to reduce friction for the user by giving a single sign-on, which is awesome. And it's great what they're doing, and it's been globally adopted, and they're doing amazing things. That's just one example of one company that we're working with right now, but
Mm-hmm.
it's done in a way that we're enhancing what they've already built by providing zero trust at the edge of authentication.
Yeah. So, and about that's because that's a really interesting application for TraitWare, and you're doing that with not just Citrix, but loads of other companies. And what makes it what makes TraitWare so unique? And I mean, you've mentioned some things that make it unique, but what else makes it really stand out from the competition?
So I think some of the biggest things that make us stand out from the competition, once you really get to see how our solution works, and I mentioned this before, is we're moving entirely to a token, in simple terms, a token-based authentication that's employing zero trust, architecture from, the moment of enrollment through deployment to use. So we're doing that in a way that is passwordless through the entire process.
Mm-hmm.
So at no point for the vast majority of the integrations that we have are we hiding or stuffing or auto-filling a credential in the background. We're actually moving to a certificate token-based authentication that has multi-factor authentication inherent in the login,
Mm-hmm.
where almost every other solution out there, other than there's 2 or 3 other startups that are moving this direction of passwordless authentication. One's out of Israel. There's one out of the UK that is doing well, and there's a brand new one that just raised a bunch of money that says they're going to do it. But basically, 98%, 99% of the other situations out there are layers of security at the login, where you've got a credential plus multi-factor authentication plus threat modeling detection behind the scenes, which still needs to happen. But the biggest differentiator for TraitWare is that we are able to provide you single sign-on, passwordless, multi-factor inherent login in one solution, as well as give the user a single pane of glass to access other accounts or other siloed data sets. So we're providing actually passwordless single sign-on to multiple accounts via an app on your mobile device that nobody else has right now. And I can do true passwordless MFA login on my mobile device with no typing, where if you're most of the other phone-based applications that for MFA, like Google Authenticator, et cetera, or Duo, if you're authenticating from the mobile device to access something on your mobile device, and you no longer have MFA because the way that their app functions, the quote unquote shared secret or the secret sauce in what they're doing is stored on your mobile. So if you're authenticating from the device that token's stored on, you no longer have MFA. Where even when I work on my mobile, TraitWare still has to go through the zero trust architecture of our authentication server, and this happens in milliseconds.
Yeah.
I can work directly on my mobile phone with true passwordless multi-factor authentication, as well as use that same frictionless two-touch login to sign in on my laptop or desktop or TV screen, et cetera. And the big thing is the way that TraitWare works, we really tie the user to the login, right? There is no way. So with most other MFA or SSO solutions, I could loan you my credentials and you could log in from somewhere else, right? So at a high level view, in a simple terms, something everyone knows, right, is Netflix or Amazon, right?
Right.
Who, if they're honest with themselves, hasn't loaned out or borrowed somebody else's login to one of those two services?
Right.
I'm guilty. My wife is guilty of, we have 2 college kids. Jeff Bezos is kind enough to give them introductory student Amazon Prime account that's much cheaper than what I would pay. And I'm probably going to get sued for saying this live, but we may or may not have borrowed one of our college students' logins to Amazon Prime, which allowed for us to get a free shipment of something, which cost Amazon money, right? Now, in even Netflix, when they first started, they promoted sharing. Most people don't realize it, but they actually promoted sharing when they first started, Netflix did, because they wanted to get to critical mass. Once they reached critical mass, they then decided that sharing was bad. Then you saw the implementation of, okay, well, you're only allowed 5 devices, right, within a family account, right? So they were trying to track your use or the sharing of those credentials from the back end rather than locking it down at the front door. So because there's no credentials from TraitWare, you can't have them phished, you can't have them stolen, and you can't loan them out, and you can't leave them on a Post-it note, which, by the way, if you want some of these Post-it notes, we made some. Oh, it's not going to show it, but it's basically, it says not for password storage on the Post-it note. If you'd like a set of those, I'm happy to mail you some. Hit me up and I'll mail you some not for password storage Post-it notes.
We need some of those. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So we only have a few more minutes, but what does the future hold for this?
So
For
the future,
passwordless.
right? So a passwordless future is coming. There are aspects of it that are here now. Actually, I mentioned earlier that RSA, who's still a major player in the space for cybersecurity and multi-factor authentication, about 6 months ago, they wrote an article saying that they thought passwordless was coming, but that it was a ways out. We were able to write a rebuttal and say, well, it's actually here now. TraitWare is deployed now and an enterprise level within healthcare providers, et cetera, and providing passwordless MFA login today. What I think the future holds is this need for the service providers to adopt authentication standards and allow people to use this type of technology at every level. I think that that's growing. Apple has made a push to say, especially on the consumer side, you need to adopt these APIs to allow for passwordless authentication, on the consumer side. There are technologies from multiple fronts, whether it's the FIDO Alliance, whether it's Apple, Google, Microsoft, pushing for a passwordless future because we all agree that the passwords need to die and they need to die yesterday. We are very hopeful that at some point TraitWare will be able to use at a consumer level. It's already being used at a consumer level in certain environments. We have some websites that are built on WordPress. We have a WordPress plugin that site administrators can deploy on their website and not only use it for administrative access in a passwordless MFA way to their WordPress website, but they can actually allow for this passwordless login on the consumer-facing side. So if you've got a WordPress site that's running WooCommerce as a e-commerce shopping portal, you could deploy TraitWare for your customers today. So the future holds the growth of that, and businesses and applications allowing for solutions like TraitWare to be consumer available. So, that's really, the future will be passwordless, and I think there'll be multiple paths to get there. And I believe TraitWare will be a leading edge, one of those ways to get there.
Seems like a no-brainer to me. I mean, I've used it, and it's like, what just happened?
There's a couple quotes, and I'm sad that I forgot his name right now. Actually, I think it was Arthur Clarke said that new technology, when it's done right, is so innovative that it appears to be magic. And people have a hard time trusting magic because it's so simple, and they think that it's an illusion. So I would encourage people to hit us up, do your homework, especially if you're a business, even a small business. If you're using G Suite or Office 365, we can take you passwordless today for those tools. So anywhere from a small business to a major enterprise could deploy TraitWare today, and go passwordless for those tools. If you're a consumer that realizes the value of being on a tool like G Suite's for increased storage or just other functionality or anything, and you want to move beyond the free plan of Gmail, we could help you out with that. So just examples like that, and that, it's interesting where it will go in the future.
Yeah. And I wanted to also, this is actually not so costly, which is another fear people have, right? I mean, it's not,
Yeah,
it's kind of peanuts.
It's not very expensive to deploy. We're typically the same price or cheaper than most password vaults out there in that deployment, and yet we provide single sign-on, MFA, passwordless login inherent in a solution. And the other thing that we do is we guarantee we will reduce your password reset tickets by greater than 60% or more. In some use cases, it's been greater than 90%. Because you're moving to a token-based authentication platform, you will cut your password support costs tremendously. You will also eliminate the soft costs of people being locked out of systems, or again, Forrester Research has done reports on this, like the average employee spends 12 to 15 minutes a week entering passwords or resetting a password. Just do the math on that of, what's your average employee cost times 15 minutes a week times 1,000 employees. It's a ginormous number.
Yeah.
And in this time of having, businesses really needing to cut costs right now, we will save you money for sure.
Awesome. Well, I think that's about it for today. I'm being told we are out of time, unless there's one last word. But Heath?
Yeah, one last word I would have is that if you're a service provider and you're listening to this today, I'm pleading with you to offer authentication standards at every tier of plan you offer, not just your highest level enterprise plan. Login security and simplicity should be available to everyone, not just your premier customers. Please deploy authentication standards such as SAML 2.0 or OpenID Connect, or look to make modern authentication available internally as from you as an OEM play, which we can do at any level. There's this perception that there's this SSO tax, and to use the integrations like those, you've got to be on this higher enterprise grade plan. If you're a service provider, I encourage you to look at how you do this for every plan, not just your premier plans. I think you'll find it will actually save you money over what you're doing today. Whether you use TraitWare or not, people need to use better authentication at every plan.
Right. It sounds, I think it's a no-brainer. So I hope everybody out there listening will give TraitWare, to reach you. Just go to TraitWare.com. Everything's there. The contact at TraitWare.com or www.TraitWare.com. A whole bunch of information on there. Ask for a demo. They're nice people. They'll give you a free trial. So anyway, thanks so much, Heath, for joining us. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and great conversation.
Yeah, I hope you'll come back. To all our viewers out there and listeners, if you're interested to learn more, again, www.TraitWare.com. And thanks for tuning in. Any questions for me? You know where to reach me, my YouTube channel or ubngo.com/goodtech. And have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you again on the next Good Tech.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Have a great day.